So spa qualifying was ridiculous as usual. I think Eddie Jordan said it best when Jake asked him to predict a winner for tomorrow, and he said, "I'm not going to because you never know in spa." And I think that's so true. Because what we saw today was a crazy qualifying um, hour. There was, Schumacher had a problem. Lost a wheel. It looked like it just wasn't attached. And that's not the first time Mercedes has had a problem with that. Um, I think they had a problem last year. I think Rosberg. I think it was Rosberg's tire that went bouncing down the pit lane at one of the races. But anyway, so Schumacher starts from last on the grid. Um, because he's in a Mercedes car with Mercedes power, um, I think he'll probably have the two Hispanias and maybe a couple virgins down the Kimmel Straight on the first or second lap. Um, but so that was interesting. And then, DeResta had an issue um, during qualifying, and then Heikki made it in to Q2. And that's, we're starting to see more consistent pace from Heikki. And because he's one of my favorite drivers, I'm glad to see that. Um, and then Jenson Button had an issue where he thought he had time for another lap, and so he was doing a cool down lap, and turned out that that was supposed to be his fast lap. So Jenson Button ended up qualifying 13th, and as Mom sat down while I was watching qualifying, and I had explained to her that he's not usually outside the top 5 or 6. Um, so that was a massive blow to Jensen and McLaren. Um, and that wasn't the only crazy thing that happened during Q2 with McLaren. It was a very interesting situation. There was a Team Lotus car um, that was followed by both Williams vehicles, and they basically all had issues coming into the bus stop chicane, and they started slowing down. And Lewis had time to finish that lap, and that was it. He wasn't going to have time to do another lap. And they were all going really slow, like beyond slow, like 208s, 206s in that range. And in the last corner, Lewis basically charged in and shoved Pastor Maldonado wide. Um, which I think he was right to do. I mean, he was setting a fast lap. He got to the chicane, to the corner, and Pastor and Rubens Barrichello were kind of going really slow. So he pushed Pastor wide. There was contact. It wasn't a lot of it, but there was contact. And then in the next corner, after they got through La Source, heading down to Eau Rouge, Pastor Maldonado, who was behind Lewis, pulled alongside him, and then cut in front of him, just chopped him off. Ended up taking a portion of the front wing. They thought for a moment there might have been suspension damage. And, the commentators were just, this is ridiculous, this is not professional. They were maybe only going 70 or 80 miles an hour at that point, but what if that had happened at, 150? Or what if that had caused damage to the front wing, and the front wing had then detached later on and gone under the car, and Lewis, lost control and got in a serious accident? These are guys who are being paid, in most cases, millions of dollars. The teams are investing tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars every year into the sport, and these guys are supposed to be held to the highest standard. And so for Pastor to do that, and then tell reporters, and I would have to guess the stewards as well, that it was an accident, it's he's lying. There's no way. I watched the footage from two different angles. There's no way that Pastor Maldonado accidentally cut in front of Lewis. He was behind him, he drove alongside him, and then he turned in on him. And, I would have so much more respect for him if he said, my emotions got the best of me in the moment, and I acted like an idiot. But instead, what he said was that, it was an accident, it didn't mean to happen. Lewis took the higher ground. He apologized for pushing Pastor wide during Q2, and kind of said we just need to move on. And I appreciated that maturity from Lewis. But so Q3 started, and there were a bunch of people that aren't usually in Q3. Alguersuari, Alonso, well, Alonso's usually there, Perez, and Petrov. And what was interesting is the order. There are a bunch of things out of the norm. The first three, not so much. It was Vettel, Hamilton, Weber. That's pretty standard. No surprises there. But what wasn't surprising was that Felipe Massa outqualified Alonso, and not by a little bit, by a second. And Alonso's consistently been the faster driver at Ferrari, so that was interesting. Nico Rosberg was fifth, showing that the Mercedes car has tons of speed, that it can really dice it up there and maybe compete for a podium spot. So I'd look forward to Michael Schumacher coming blasting from last on the grid. Jaime Alguersuari was sixth. Toro Rosso was sixth. They've had moments of, solid, 10th or 11th place runs, starting to pick up points, but sixth, that's shocking to me, but in a good way. And then the biggest surprise for me out of everything was that Brunno Senna managed seventh. After he, took over Nick Heidfeld's seat, I was perhaps too critical and unfair. With Bruno's time at HRT, I really felt like, they have a slow car. We know they had a slow car, but it seemed like he made some silly mistakes at HRT. But what we saw today was that he has the talent. He, Renault has been lucky to get a car inside the top 10 a lot of times this season. I know Petrov had, a good race earlier in the year, but overall, their car has been, mid-pack, almost down with the Saubers and the Force Indias. And for Brunno to come in and, really take it, you really challenge, a Toro Rosso and a Mercedes, and to not be, to be less than a second off of Massa, that's a pretty big achievement. So apologies to Brunno, unless of course he cocks it up on the first lap of the race. But I'm thoroughly excited to see what Brunno is going to bring to Renault. I feel like Petrov has been a good kind of mid-pack racer, but what they need is the next Kubica. And if Kubica is not going to be there, maybe Brunno Senna is the one. Alonso disappointing down in 8th. He wants to be challenging for podiums and for race wins, and to qualify 8th is a problem. Sergio Perez was Sauber was 9th, and Vitaly Petrov was the other Renault driver in 10th. And the theme tomorrow will of course be the weather, and who's going to have the top line speed, because a lot of this track is full throttle. The Kimmel Straight, you're just full throttle for like 20 something seconds as you climb up. There's a hill. The Kimmel Straight is not flat. This track has a lot of elevation changes, so it'll be interesting to see. I think the first lap's going to be interesting. I think that Lewis and Nico will have a really good chance to put the slipstream on some of the people. I think that Sebastian has to be worried that that Lewis will get him. And if he's not worried about the first lap, he will be worried on lap 3 when DRS is enabled. Of course, everything goes out of the window if it's actually a wet race tomorrow. They're still forecasting that it'll be dry, but you never know in Spa. So, thoroughly looking forward to the race, and I will talk to you kids later.